Well, ladies and gentlemen, you may have noticed already that this is not a normal campaign episode. If we're being totally honest, Nathanael and his wife just had a baby, and Michael and his family are still living out of boxes. So instead of falling, or rather letting the schedule fall to the wayside, we decided to record something and post it. So this is kind of the part 2 continuation, whatever you want to call it, of Nathanael and I talking about Dungeons and Dragons and other random stuff, somewhat DM to DM. So we hope that you enjoy this, and if you don't, just be patient. We'll get back to our regularly scheduled shenanigans soon, we hope.
Who knows what awaits us across the board gaming table,
across the internet. See, and this
across the DM screen,
right? Because at this point now, you and I are like 10 minutes away doing this online, whereas when me and Michael did it remotely, it was a whole 20 minutes away. So at some point, it will actually be necessitated, like genuinely, that we be remote. But now, because of scheduling and just life in general, we're doing this. Somewhat remotely.
A new adventure for us.
Yes.
Having to build a new proficiency. Proficiency with remote recording equipment.
Yes, audio engineering equipment plus 0. I was thinking about this just a little while ago. So, how old is James now?
He's a month old. Well, he'll be a month old tomorrow.
Oh.
Yep.
How would you describe either babies and or being a new parent in Dungeons and Dragons terms? And you can't just say you have like 3 levels of exhaustion, because that's cheating.
Yeah, that is cheating. I think the biggest thing is that it's like, in some ways, a escort quest that never ends, you know? But there's also little, like, gates or challenges you have to do along the way that... Another way you could put it is that, like, there's a new MacGuffin, there's a new like artifact that is motivating your party to like move forwards.
And we would never describe babies as big bads, but there are times.
Yes, he's incredibly proficient with manufacturing. We could say noxious substances.
His persuasion checks are off the charts.
His charisma is very, very high. He has advantage on most charisma checks he makes. Towards me, at least.
With persuasion, he is proficient with crying.
Right, yes. Yes, charisma very high, intelligence, wisdom very low. Can't talk.
What would a wise baby look like?
I don't know.
Just a very sage baby.
It'd be like, I know that I shouldn't scratch my own face because I'm sleeping comfortably right now,
but I did it.
But I did it anyway. I have been missing playing D&D. Oh my gosh. I've been in like 30-minute increments playing a little bit of Baldur's Gate 3, which is like the D&D video game.
Yep.
And also on my drives around town, been listening to the new NADPOD Jake campaign.
I listened to the second episode this morning.
I'm like probably 3/4 of the way through the first episode.
Okay.
And I like love the party. I love all the characters so far. Like there are several laugh out loud moments already. With I love anytime that Brian Murphy gets to play a character because he's so often just the DM. I just love how each of their characters plays off each other in a fun way.
He is still very much the DM too, especially in the second episode. There are some times where he's like, all right guys, we got to keep moving.
Yeah.
Can't just shenaniganize.
He is using a third-party fighter subclass.
Oh, is he?
The Steelhawk. Yeah, it's not a Wizards of the Coast deal. I think it's published by the Griffin Saddlebag. They mostly make items, but they also have subclasses, which made me be like, oh, like I wonder what other like third-party like stuff is out there.
Oh yeah.
And I think the last time I looked was like 5 or 6 years ago, and it was all just like not play tested, not very good,
just
random stuff. But like there's a huge amount of like really solid looking subclasses, and just like other classes now. Like I'm looking, there's this person named Kibbles who like D&D Reddit is like, this person's stuff is really like solid, balanced, play tested, and they have this subclass called a Warlord, which looks really interesting, which is basically like a martial support class.
Interesting. Like Battlemaster on crack, maybe? Or
kind of like that, but they're all of their like, instead of superiority die, they have leadership die. So I think the premise is that they're more of like the tactician or the general, and they can basically give buffs by issuing orders. They use quote unquote leadership die instead of supremacy die. So they can issue as a bonus action, issue an order to enable one of their party members to use their reaction to take a movement that doesn't provoke an opportunity attack. So essentially they can kind of do more of the Battle Master stuff with less of a focus on dealing damage.
Interesting.
Which looks really interesting. I love the flavor of it. Or there's another one that I was looking at called a Spell Blade, which kind of fills the melee magic user a little bit better, that Eldritch Knight kind of does, but not super well. That Blade Singer kind of does as well.
I think the War Cleric's pretty good at that. I just happen to be... It's a little more caster heavy, because you're going to get into higher level stuff. Never getting 2 attacks does kind of limit that, but you can use your bonus action to that attack a few times. So it's one of those...
Right. It evens out.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, the published stuff is good and enough probably for most things that you would want to do. But
I was actually listening to our the first conversation we had, and one of the things we kind of laughed about was you think you've created something new or you've homebrewed something really cool. It's oh, Kibbles did that 6 months ago, or Griffin Saddlebag has a picture with their version of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I got David that Humblewood campaign setting for Christmas. That's the Hit Point Press did that one. And it doesn't, it has, I think it has some extra classes and subclasses, but it has a lot of races that are, they're all animals and birds, but you could very easily flavor them as whatever you wanted to. And they've got some cool stuff.
Yeah, I feel like for me, the thing that all those third-party things help me with the most is coming up with weird and different things, whether they be items or monsters or subclasses, and just having the slightest amount of balance and testing having gone into it, because I can come up with
more than
items.
us just throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Yeah, I can come up with stuff, but it's not. There's zero guarantee that it's going to be helpful or fair or fun to use.
Or not broken completely.
Yeah, completely broken. So that's something I really like, especially what is it, Kobold Press? I feel like we've used a lot of their monster.
Yeah, I think
stuff.
we've in home games and the podcast, I think we've used that one the most for sure.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, Griffin Saddlebag's really good. The Hit Point Press stuff is pretty cool. I didn't know they had as much original content until more recently. I knew they had a lot of really cool, they've got those spell cards that have the 3D, you flip the card around and it wiggles a little bit. It's that's really cool. I'm not going to spend money on that because it's a cool spell card, but it's neat.
Yeah. I think, there are people who you and I have multiple hobbies, right? There's some people where this is their only hobby.
I think if you asked Mary, she would say I don't have multiple hobbies anymore.
I feel like you do. You play disc golf. That counts as a hobby.
That's true.
3D printing is a discrete, separate hobby.
Distinct, barely.
Distinct,
I don't have you can see on the Discord over my shoulder. You can't see all the little people I've been printing
for the finale of your one of your home games. Well, talking about the third party Kobold Press stuff is maybe a good segue into some of the rapid fire questions that we had talked about doing. Let's talk monsters.
What's your favorite monster or group of monsters? Do you have one?
Yeah, man. I was thinking. I think I have different answers to this. If I was to pick, what's my favorite monster? That's just the quintessential D&D. I'm at a impasse tied between a beholder and a dragon.
That was gonna be my guess. I feel like I would maybe err on the side of beholder for that one, just because dragons are in other fantasy lore, whereas beholders are just on everything.
Right. I think in terms of vibes, the atmosphere that there's a dragon, the pounding of the wings, the beating of the air, you feel in the wind this massive beast coming towards you, and all of the sort of cultural currency that a dragon has. There's something epic about fighting a dragon. It's awesome. In terms of the interesting mechanics, I love the beholder can do a lot of things.
Those rays are insane.
Yeah, exactly. They do different things. They can levitate. They have the anti-magic stuff. They even have a pretty powerful melee attack. So I just love the versatility. In some ways, I feel like a beholder fight is a more interesting fight for a party to come up against.
I can say with complete honesty that the Beholder fight in our first home game was the hardest I ever had to not metagame. It was so bad because I, as a aspiring DM and I was already DMing for the in-laws at that point, but knowing how bad some of those rays could be, it was so hard not to like yell at everybody else to boost certain things, or now would be a good one to use your inspiration. But also it was terrifying because I knew that my character would not know that and would just be going full bore at it anyway.
Yeah.
So it was like, this is what my character would do, even if I think he's gonna die.
Man, I'm trying to remember what was the context of the Beholder fight in the first campaign, because that was like he wasn't the BBEG.
Mm-mm. He was the underwater. He had taken over one of those moving towers, and was causing some of the fish people to do bad things.
Yes, I totally remember now. Yes, he had taken over one of the towers.
That was probably my favorite little arc that we did, just because I think every one of those fights there was something very much unexpected, or it was just intense. Like none of your fights are ever just like throw away whatever, but that whole underwater time, I think we were no pun intended, we were completely out of our element. We had no idea what was going on, and you kept pulling the rug out from under us. You kept us in that, or me at least, in that level of just kind of bated breath. Oh my gosh, this is so cool, but what awful thing is going to happen?
Yeah. So those are two, like, if I'm thinking like from the combat mechanic side of things, Dragon or Beholder, I also, but I think like if it's for me, like my own personal preference, I just love the idea of minions.
Okay.
And specifically, I think I love goblins. I just think goblins are so fun. They're so fun to just throw, just 100 of them at a party and just, and you know that I love to have every fight be a mix of beefier enemies and a bunch of minions. And I think in some ways I want D&D to feel for the players like they're heroes going on an adventure, and they're important, and they're powerful, and they're strong. And I think something that is maybe a DM's trick to sort of cultivate that is to let them just like cut through a bunch of minions,
just
a
scythe
bunch of
down some baddies.
Yeah, just cut, like, absolutely. I mean, like on a like in every good story, right? In every good heroic story, either superheroes or Lord of the Rings, the heroes, they just like cut. There's a bunch of bad guys that they just are able to cut through, and then there's a boss that they have to fight, and that's hard.
It's actually the challenge.
That's the challenge, but I think I love. And I think I can get overlooked. I think sometimes people can tend to be like, no, I'm just going to put one boss in there, which is epic, and sometimes that's really good. But I think that the narrative tension can get. Sometimes it can be more enjoyable if you throw those waves of underlings at the players and let them build up. Oh, like, we're strong, we're cutting through these guys, and then they meet the boss who they can't do that to, and they're like, oh no, this guy's really strong because we've been cutting through all of his minions. Now he's the real deal.
Also, mechanically, it's a lot easier for one strong bad guy to miss a couple times and then immediately not be scary. I have had that happen so many times.
Yes, in a lot of ways, minions heighten the perception of difficulty, even if it's not really that. Even if it's like, if you add up all the minion hit points and the big bad hit points, and it's like, it's really not that big a difference.
Well, and that has to do with the black magic that is the challenge rating system anyway. Every time, what is it, the Kobold Fight Club, it's a great resource. But at the same time, I still am just like, okay, it says medium, odds are this might kill him. It says hard, odds are they're going to figure out one way to beat this guy, and it's not a problem. Yep. So it is still fun. And that's where sometimes, too, we come down to, you want your bad guys to be exciting, but exciting can be the players are just having fun beating the tar out of it, or they're having to work really hard to stay alive. Like, it's exciting and engaging for everybody one way or the other. Sometimes the DM has his feelings hurt, and that's just a sacrifice we have to make.
Sometimes you get whomped.
You're whomping my bad guy, but it's fine because you're having fun.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's a like, if you can get yourself to this point where you feel this way, it's really helpful. Where you think of it as a win-win.
Mm-hmm.
Either the heroes have it super easy, and they feel like, they're heroes.
Yes, they're patting themselves on the back.
Yeah. It's a tough fight, and they're like, oh, that was tough. That was fun. It was a challenge. We overcame it. Or they get the crap kicked out of them, in which they're like, man, that was epic. Like, we have to go get revenge.
Exactly.
If you can view it with that mindset, I think it can be a little bit more go with the flow of how everything's.
Yeah, you don't feel like it's just a one option to win or lose or whatever.
As the DM, yeah. And I think it helps you to be less like the pressure's off. In some ways, it's the way that I think about it in design encounters. I'm like, okay, like what really would be available to these like cultists under the city? Like, they're not going to have a iron golem. Yeah. They're a bunch of pushovers. Like, maybe they're able to summon a minor fiend or something like that. But like that, that's the limit. And if that means that the heroes who are a little over leveled, if they wipe the floor, that's okay. Like, there's going to be people that they wipe the floor with in any campaign.
Yeah.
There's also going to be people who they go and pick a fight with who will probably wipe the floor with them.
Yeah, you're going to have to come back tomorrow, guys.
Yeah. Level up a little bit.
Do you have a least favorite monster? Or one that you're maybe this might get
That's a good
this
question.
might be more of a hot take kind of thing, or is there one that you're just tired of? I don't think I have one of those, and while you think of that,
I'm mulling it over.
I think my favorite group of bad guys is the Drow. They're just because they were the baddies that I used in my first little mini arc. So there's that not emotional that kind of nostalgic. Thank you. That kind of nostalgia. Okay, I use them first. Yeah. They're the best, but they also have a lot of variety because they keep building to them. So there's a lot of different types of them.
Right.
And so that's why I like them a lot too. They're a very easy one to kind of stack the encounter like you were talking about. You get one beefy guy, a couple of weenie guys, and a caster. And that's and the stat blocks are all already done. I think those blocks in particular are really well done. They also have that ability to, anytime they hit you with a ranged weapon, you have to make a poison saving throw.
Right.
And if you fail it badly, you're unconscious, which can really up the stakes really quickly.
That can really mess with a party.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's my favorite group family of stat blocks. I don't know. Mm-hmm. My favorite like mechanical use of a bad guy is a caster with minions. I think you hit the minions really help, but when it's that caster's turn and he can cast chain lightning for a second time.
Yeah.
I think I've said this before when I'm DMing our group. Anytime there's like a really meaningful combat, my kind of box that I want to check is to knock down one person at least one time. Yeah. Because somebody's making death throws, that adds somebody has to go, ooh, I got to go help them out. That just, to me, maybe it's too formulaic, but that immediately adds some like, okay, this is serious. The funny music, insert the record scratch. Whoop.
Yes. I mean, that's a huge sort of just emotional like way that the tension gets heightened. And, like, what does it mean for a party to have fun in D&D? It's not, I think most of the time, oh, we win every combat and never have any issues and we never have, like, there needs to be stakes. Mm-hmm. And having that goal of like, okay, I want to make sure people feel the stakes in some way, I think is really good. I love that. I think I completely agree. I was thinking another monster that I love is just the Lich archetype, or like the evil bad necromancer type wizard is really fun.
The whole phylacteries thing is pretty cool. Like, you think you killed the bad guy, but you didn't. I mean, Voldemort has phylacteries, for crying out loud. Like, there's, it is somewhat of a played trope because it's so effective. Like, you think you've won, but there's one, you didn't get the last strand. Every horror movie ever, the heroes are walking away covered in blood, defeated, whatever, but something twitches, or you see one little scaly mite of something crawl out of the burned out house, and there's your sequel, or there's your, because you have to go back and finish it. Just like, come on.
Right. I feel like in some ways my least favorite, there's no like, I guess maybe slimes. I don't care about them. Maybe that's like in my mind the worst that they are is like environmental hazards. They're
Yeah.
mindless, sometimes predatory creatures. I think more, that's personal preference. I think something that I would love to see changed is expansion of some of those like minion groups to have higher level challenges. Like if there's a goblin horde to have like higher level threats,
like different iterations of it, kind of.
Yeah, maybe not with goblins. I think goblins work really good as like primarily a threat to a party of 1 to 5 because they're wimpy and weird and cowardly and stupid. But like orc horde stat blocks, or having higher level, like higher challenge rating single monster, like an animated super skeleton or something. I don't know. I found myself in some of my campaigns when I come up like, oh, like I would love for there to be the arc that you described earlier, the Sahagwin, the fish people. There's only like 2 like stat blocks in the monster manual.
Yeah, for underwater baddies.
So I had to do a lot of like taking other stat blocks and sort of filing the serial numbers off and duct taping Sahagin,
sticking fins on it.
Vibes on it, which is fine, but it's a lot of work. But it's more work, and I would love for there to be more sort of Sahagwin,
like the drow,
fishmancer. Like the drow, for more things to get the drow.
Yeah, that is a very fleshed out enemy core, I guess you could call it.
Yes, I'd love to see the same thing with gnolls, Sahagwin, orcs. Orcs are a little bit.
And you had said before, just I think some of our conversation, you always felt like, and I think I agree to a large extent, when you're DMing, oftentimes you decide on one kind of cannon fodder bad guy, and to somewhat, it's at the expense of the other ones. You pick, it's either goblins,
right,
or it's gnolls, or it's orcs, or it's drow, because they're not all super statted out to each level. And so if you're only using pre-made stat blocks, which you and I think are good enough to we can at least reskin things, but if you're only using what they have, that challenge rating 1 quarter or whatever it is to 3, they don't have a gnoll that's 6 to 9. And so I just remember you saying that's like, you kind of pick one, and that's like your intro level bad guy, and then you can expand or you restat everything. But just sometimes it can be difficult when you're trying to find a well fleshed out and available baddie family.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think in some ways that's why I really like. I mean, I like goblins because they are firmly like they're for the 1 through 5 area. But beyond that, I really like the sort of like necromancer, undead, vampire kind of thing, because it makes sense for a necromancer to have like a legion of like skeletons that are all challenge rating 1/2 or whatever. But then to have, ghouls or vampires or other sort of like undead.
They spent a little more time summoning this bad guy or.
Right, yeah. That's a little bit easier to sort of have the flexibility of having that faction grow in power with the heroes along the campaign.
I think some of my least favorite bad guys are probably intellect devourers and rust monsters, because if you run them like the stat block says, which is part of what makes them scary and adds the stakes to them, they can ruin your day.
Yep.
So quickly and so badly. And that's where some of it is because I struggle to, after the fact, kind of balance that stuff out. So, a rust monster just eats away your armor. Well, dang it. Now you have nothing for the next 5 or 6 sessions. Or an intellect devourer
gotta go to a town.
Eats your brain, and your character is effectively dead because of one failed save.
Yeah.
That's lame. But also that's what makes them scary as bad guys. Right. And so it's hard for me to, I want the risk reward to be fairly equal. And I feel like for those in particular, it is way heavy to the risk cost side.
Yeah. I feel like in a lot of ways, some like those are in some ways relics of the game's past, where like in previous editions, I think maybe before 3rd edition, maybe some in 3rd edition. It's not this way in 5th, But definitely in first and second edition, the vibe of the game was so much more like you expected your character to die. Characters would die
Okay.
all the
That's
time.
true, because I know
and so you would.
Was it second edition that was super easy for them to die?
I think in first edition as well. I think there are some games that people play where they homebrew rules to make it like this is a more of a gritty, fantasy setting where you can die at the drop of the hat or the roll of the dice, and some people like that. And I think there's actually some ways in which if we went into a game being like, hey, this is going to be the case, like I think that could be fun.
Oh yeah.
But that's most people I don't think play D&D that way anymore.
I think you hit the nail on the head, because it's almost like having a shoving match with your sibling, and all of a sudden they get really mad. You're like, whoa, this is not what we were doing here. So I think those bad guys definitely fall into that category. It's like, oh snap, these consequences got real fast.
Yeah. I think so much of it just goes down to like, what kind of a game do you want to play? Does your table want to play? Do you and your friends who are, your group? Because every campaign's going to look different. Every table's going to look a little different.
Well, it has to do with like setting the expectation beforehand, or at least giving it a chance to. Let's say you start out silly and you get gritty. You don't just flip that switch. You make it more gradual so that people can kind of get their heads around it a little bit, maybe.
Right. Yeah. Like if I'm creating Mr. Sparkles the Bard and I like go into session 1 and it's just a bloodbath, there's a part of me that's going to be like, I wish that I had created a different character than Mr. Sparkles the Bard.
You couldn't have told me that Mr. Sparkles maybe not the best fit for this
horrible
world?
I could have made the brooding, broody McBrood face, and that would have been fine.
Yeah.
I just needed to know what kind of world we were getting into.
All right, so that'll bring us to another question. Well, kind of, sort of. Do you have any hard nose when it comes to a DM, or like, when I say hard nose, like no, like anything that you will just veto off the bat?
You mean like game options, or like concepts or storytelling?
I would say more like
devices?
Game options, like rule things. Everybody loves to hate on Silvery Barbs. Everybody loves to hate on Aarakocra. Those kind of things. For me, I don't think I have any hard nose. And again, some of this is limited because I've only DM'd for like 12 people total.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of these people are not going to just gamify the system. They're not just going to spam one move.
Right.
I personally think Silvery Barbs is overpowered the way that it's written.
Yeah.
I think you should have to and they may have changed it in the new rules. We were talking about NADPOD, and they're using a lot of the 2024 rules.
Right.
There's a lot more stuff that you have to declare beforehand.
Yeah, I was really surprised. Like the lucky a luck roll, you have to declare a luck roll beforehand, which so that changes it. So that makes it so much less powerful.
The lucky was so overpowered, though.
That's true.
It was insane. So I think Silvery Barbs, if I could fix it, quote unquote, in one thing, it would be that you have to declare it beforehand, because being able to just like on a whim take away a crit against it, like that's just too powerful to me. But other than that, I don't have any hard nose that I'd be like, nope, can't do that. Or basically my idea is, because basically if you start treating as I'm going to cheat and win every encounter with this loophole, all of a sudden the bad guys are going to start having loopholes too. And not as like a punishment, but at the same time, it's like your one trick pony is going to get worn out.
Right. Well, like as the DM, there's a sense in which it's your job to make sure that the game has stakes. And if there's a loophole that makes it not have stakes, then
we're going to close that loophole.
We're gonna find a way to rectify the situation. For me, I think, and this is in some ways, I guess, the difference in the way that we think about D&D. For me, the biggest thing is I also don't have any hard nose, but I want to be very careful to make sure that things are within the bounds of the setting, if that makes sense. So if there are no gnomes in the campaign setting for whatever reason, it's like, well, they just aren't. Sorry, it's cool that you want a gnome character. Put it in your back pocket.
Well, that's where it comes down to. Like, that's one of my things that I don't like about the whole Tasha's. You can just make your characters whatever you want them to be.
Right.
I don't have a problem with that per se, but like if you want to be an elf, most people want to be an elf for certain reasons. There's certain ideas that come with an elf, you know.
Yeah. Elves are nerds, and they're smart, and they're weaker than other people.
Elves are always described as, you know, very dexterous and fey and quick and stuff. If you want to be somebody beefy and bulky, maybe don't be an elf.
Right.
But all that to say is, like, if there's no gnomes in your world, okay, just reskin a gnome as a human. Unless the idea of being short and having pointy ears is the end all and be all of your character.
Right.
You're a human with gnome stats. Like, I've heard it said, you know, flavor's free. Reskin it, you know. Don't reinvent the wheel every time you run into any difficulty. It's like, you want to be a gnome? We don't have gnomes, but you can use the stat block for any race that you want. We'll just, you know, rename some things or maybe reflavor it a little bit, but that's fine. It's not no, I want to be a gnome. Why? Do you, like, I'm not just saying no to be a jerk. Are you just saying yes to just be a jerk? Like, what's the deal here? And thankfully, none of us have experienced that in our games, but
right.
That's one of those things, like, just reskin it. Like, I'm not going to come up with some new, potentially game-breaking or overpowered thing. What if I had a crazy sickle? It's like, okay, yeah, it's a whip. There's already rules for that. And, you know, then maybe we tweak it a little bit, but I'm a firm believer in just reskin the heck out of it. Like, our game has guns. There's some guns in the DM's guide, not great. Just reskin them as other ranged stuff.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I think this is probably a point where, like, you and I we agree on parts of it and disagree on parts of it, because I love some of the, like, different nitty-gritty weapon variants that are out there. And part of that, I think, is because as I'm processing through, as we're talking about this, is because marshals don't have nearly as many options for things as casters do. And so what if, you know, oh, this weapon did a different type of damage, or it did damage and forced a, you know, saving throw for this other type of thing, or, you know, impose this kind of effect. I just, you know, I think that could be fun. And I totally agree. Like, yeah, you don't reinvent the wheel. You don't need to make things complicated. But if you want to, that's fun too. And if your DM is cool with it, then you know.
Well, and some of it too is, like, I think to start off.
Sure,
you know, like, oh, can I find a gun in the next session? Sure. I'm not going to go crazy, you know, with this unplay tested thing. So yeah, it's just a short bow. You know, maybe we can upgrade it later to you get an exploding arrow or something.
Sure.
But I always want the bones to be something that's been well tested by somebody other than me.
yeah, fair enough. Yeah, but I don't think I have any hard nose. Even silvery barbs, like, I don't know. I think the making it so you have to declare it makes sense to me, or having it be a higher spell level than its first level, I think.
It's crazy. I think a lot of it is that the fact that so many people are playing online with strangers or people that they're only interacting with in the game has led to just, you know, people with very different perspectives and different attitudes. Yeah. And then you get people that are maybe toxic and just like, yeah, haha, I screwed you over again and again.
Well, it's just a lot harder to, like, view your collaborative time around the D&D table as something that is not just for you, if you're not actually sitting around a table with, like, your friends.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, like, and playing online is great. Like, all of our games are basically going to be online now, but we all know each other. And so just, you know, being a friend, like, D&D is a way that you can be a friend. And thinking of it in that terms, and, like, even if the person is anonymous on the internet, like, thinking through, I mean, you know, treating them like a human being and being a friend to them and desiring their enjoyment of the game as well as your own.
Goes a long way.
You can avoid, it goes a long way. And those are the ways that you can avoid the sort of problems, I think, that you see on a lot of the horror stories on the internet.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Some of those you read and you're like, please tell me that's made up. Because
like,
I don't want there to be a person like this in the real world.
Yeah, there's definitely some that I read and I'm like, you made this up for points on the internet. Like, that's not how real people work.
Come on.
But then again, sometimes I meet real people who do and say crazy things, and I'm like, well, that could happen.
It's like, wow, it really does take all types.
The darkness in the soul of man is dark enough to do some of those things that you read about.
All right, so we've got no hard no's necessarily. Yeah. Are there any written rules that you think are dumb or that you never mess with? Ooh. Which also leads me to a question: have you read the DM's Guide cover to cover?
I have not read it cover to cover. I would say I've probably read most of it. I've read a lot of it.
I have read the player's handbook cover to cover, but not the DM's guide.
I've read a lot of the DM's guide.
I remember being surprised by the DM's guide at first. I almost wish they called it the world building guide or something.
Yeah.
Because it makes sense. The player's handbook has more of the mechanics, more of the rules for how to play the game. The DM's guide has so much more just like, this is how you might want to think about playing your game.
Yeah.
Not mechanics, not rules. And I love the item tables.
Yeah.
It's got a ton of great resources, but that was one thing I was kind of like, oh, this doesn't have like a handy dandy guide to running every encounter, which is why I like D&D in the first place, because it allows for so much improvisation. Or you just reskin it, like I said, well, there's not a rake in the book. Okay, just make it a spear or pretend it's a dagger on a pole and you've got a D4 of slashing. There, you've got a rake.
The two things that I could not care less
right.
about.
Uh-huh.
And when I say these two things, you'll realize both those have to do a lot of math. XP, calculating XP.
That's, again, black magic.
Yeah. Well, like, the way that it's supposed to work in the DM's guide is you, like, add the number from the stat block together and then divide it however many ways there are characters.
Yeah.
And that's how many XP you get each encounter. Like, I would still be doing the math from our first campaign if that's how I was doing XP. Like, the regular sort of monster-based XP, do not care about. I think, unless there's, like, I'm sure there's an app to do it. I'm sure there's a computerized way that automatically does it.
That Kobold Fight Club does it kind of, but I don't.
Yeah.
I just ignore it.
I just think the milestone method of like, hey, you achieve a quest, you accomplish a milestone, you level up.
Yeah.
I think that's a much cleaner, easier way. If you're listening to this and you disagree with me, that's fine. But that's where I'm at. I cannot be bothered to calculate the XP. The other one is encumbrance.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that one.
If you like a video game, like calculating the weight.
All I ever think of is Diablo, because you had that little grid. Every item that you had took up X amount of spaces on that grid, and you were, you'd spend hours literally just rearranging the objects so you could nest them better to fit more stuff in your backpack.
So that's part of why I'm like
gold weight.
Gold weight. Oh my gosh. Like, I'm pretty sure like 100 pieces of gold, you should be encumbered. And it's just that's ridiculous.
Well, and just the amount of stuff that either you start out with in the book, everybody gets a blankety blank pack or a lot of money. And just the number of things that you just make up on the spot. Like, oh yeah, can I say I have a frying pan? Well, sure, you got a frying pan. The amount of stuff that all these characters would be carrying with them at all times.
Yeah.
You'd look like those old ladies in the labyrinth. They're just sticking stuff onto these massive piles.
That's part of why pretty soon, I feel like in most campaigns, I'm like, let me just give someone a bag of holding.
Bag of holding just falls out of the sky.
So we don't have to think about it. Here you go. But, I feel like my approach is to be like, all right, let's just sort of logically think about this. Like,
let's have some common sense.
I want to carry this table around with me. No, you can't do that. I want to pick up my third sword. That's probably fine. I don't know.
Yeah.
It'll be okay. Like, I'm assuming you're putting your pack down when you get into combat. You're not carrying.
Well, and you're not changing swords out willy-nilly left and right either. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm that's one of the things that I'm most content to like hand wave and just be like, well, like as long as you're not like abusing.
Yeah, again, as long as you're not spamming it or something, yeah.
Right. Like, there are limits, but I'm not going to look too hard at it because I don't want to calculate how much a candle weighs or how much the gold you're carrying weighs or, all that kind of stuff.
But if I mash them all together and use all their wicks simultaneously, could I have my light farther? Fine.
No.
I think for me, it's funny because I had thought of a few items. For me, the whole druids no metal thing is just so dumb. I don't know why that is written into the book. It's, if you want to suggest that, like as a variant, all day, every day. But that is one where I'm just like, no, that is, I have told players like that, nope, you can ignore that part. If you can walk around and metal all you want. Because where does metal come from? The ground. Anyway, that one is dumb to me. And then as far as couldn't be bothered, sleeping in armor.
Yeah.
And I think those are the two big ones for me. It's like, yeah, the
Yeah.
whole druids and metal thing is just, in my opinion, just dumb. I don't, if you want your character to be that way, awesome, because you've put more
Yeah.
thought into it than just, this is not allowed. And then the whole sleeping in armor, can't sleep in armor. It is interesting. There's a lot of these rules that are kind of nitty gritty. I don't
Right.
know anybody that I've ever talked to or listened to or read about that actually uses those rules.
Right.
I'm sure there are people that are, and that's fine. That's how they want to play. But for me, it's just like, why? Who cares? Well, for me, it's like, part of the reason I never liked playing realistic driving games or realistic sports games on video games, I don't want to have to push a button to make sure my players stretch. Or that if I haven't changed the oil in my ridiculous race car, that will affect the outcome. I have to deal with that in real life. I get pulled muscles. I have to pay for oil changes or change my oil. I don't want to have to deal with it in this ridiculous escape that I'm doing. I want to play something where I can fly anytime just because.
Right.
Well, you didn't stretch before you flew, so now you've tweaked your neck and you just can't.
You pulled
for
your
a month.
wing.
Yes. You failed to stretch your wings properly.
Yeah, I think those are both definitely things that like if it's not meaningfully contributing either to the narrative or the mechanics, I feel like I'm fine to like hand wave it. Yeah.
Hand wave it or toss it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like the druid thing to me, that seems almost like something about the lore of druids in Faerun that somehow found its way into the official rules. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like I feel like it's totally fine for like, in our world building, these druids can't have metal. Mm-hmm. How on earth could that affect the mechanics of druids? Every other class that has magic, if they have proficiency in armor, they can wear armor. So like,
or it's like, okay, well, let's say you're by the book. You can't wear metal armor. Look, you just find the heaviest bark you've ever found, and suddenly you have heavy armor.
Yeah.
Plate
bark.
Loopholed.
Bark plate.
Yeah. Bark plate, yeah. That sounds cool. That's awesome.
That does sound cool. Magic item idea. Writing it down.
No disadvantage on stealth checks.
Ooh.
It's like mithril, but for druids. All right, so in sticking with the negative aspect of things, are there any world-building details that you just skip or just kind of hand wave?
I probably, for me, a lot less than you. Just guessing.
Personality-wise, yeah, that's probably a safe assumption.
I mean, yeah, calendar, languages.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I try to steal as much as I can for like the flavor of my worlds from like actual historical, periods or historical events or historical people. But the sort of, I feel like a lot of like almost every fantasy novel, there's like, this, there's 12 months, but they all have different names and they all have, suspiciously similar numbers of days to our months, but they're different. It's Severus and Radamon and
Sundurus.
The third day of Sundrus. It's like,
I think for me, it's more of it's a bigger distraction. It's like, wait, I don't know I have no context for this. Right. I think that's definitely one that I hardly ever invite. I know sometimes it'll be like, the 7th day of the week. Yeah. Or a week has 7 days, but we don't need to worry about the names.
Right.
This season, this cycle, these just kind of generic amounts or units of time, but they don't necessarily have to have names, because then for me, I'm trying, it's like trying to decipher a code.
Right.
And that is distracting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to have to get bogged down into the details, either as the DM because you have enough to do, enough on your plate,
yeah,
or as the players because you're like trying to focus on the things that the DM wants you to focus on. Mm-hmm. You don't, want to get distracted on like, is it is it
Secundius or Sidarius?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Did our contact tell us to meet us at high sun or low sun on Sidarius? I can't remember. It's like, just say noon.
About lunchtime.
I'm trying to think of other like world building stuff that I skip.
I think the biggest one for me is like dates and calendars and I think some of that is because often in the worlds that I'm building, those kind of things are not as critical.
Right.
And so I don't feel like adding that much effort to it. Like always, all of this stuff is, our preferences. If you enjoy that, great.
Yeah.
But it's just not for me. Just like chemistry. I'm glad there's people that like chemistry. It is not for me.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure there's we have our calendar heads out there somewhere, but that's not us.
Just Google Docs full of different calendars and day names.
Couldn't be me. I have Google Docs full of other things like ship names and historical battles in the context of the world and famous politicians and hand-drawn maps.
Those are the things that I make up on the spot and then forget what I called them 5 minutes ago. I think that happened in our last session. I named somebody and then got to talking about them again a little bit, and Anya was like, "You mean this name?" I was like, "Yep," because I didn't write that down, and it was obviously made up on the spot.
Yeah, as long as people know what you're talking about, it's fine.
The guy with the scar. That's one of the reasons I did not like the Game of Thrones books as much, because it was so hard to keep the characters straight.
Yeah, there's a billion of them.
And one of the good things in the show was like, oh, the brown-haired guy with the gold on him. Like, him.
I can see him. I know what that actor looks like.
I still don't know his name, but, Goldie Brownhead or whatever you want to call him.
Yeah.
Visual cues.
Goldie Brownhead. one of the fan favorites from the Game of Thrones community.
It's one of the NPCs we're going to meet soon.
Goldie Brownhead.
Nathaniel's furiously scratching through NPC names.
Write that down.
It's Captain Goldie Brownhead.
Yeah.
I have never felt bored by anything like this when you're DMing. What is something you find or that you feel like you're trying really hard to keep it interesting? So like for me in games, I don't ever want to neglect asking characters if they're going to keep watch.
Yeah.
But I don't want to roll on a random encounter table every watch. Because sometimes that can stretch sessions longer than you might want them to, or maybe you're not prepared. That way I don't have to have 15 monster blocks ready at all times.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't want to be like, well, the only time I ask you to keep watch, obviously something bad's going to happen. I find that so hard. That and travel. Yeah. One of the things that I think NADPOD does really well is they just kind of avoid that. I don't really know how they do it.
Yeah.
But for me, it's very hard to keep those consistent and interesting.
I think in some ways, those two things, I mean, in something like NADPOD, because it's more on rails, kind of.
Yeah.
Not.
It's a little less sandboxy.
Yeah, like the DM, Brian or whoever's DMing can kind of be like, oh, you have this thing that's going to take you to a new city. Like if you think about it, like almost all of their travel is like pretty instantaneous, or it's on a ship, or they're teleporting, and most of their rests are like in a town. Yeah. Or it's rare that they're like camping out.
Yeah, he does a really good job making things all happen in one day, because they're always like, yeah, remember that from 9 hours ago?
Right, exactly.
6 sessions later.
And so I think that's part of how they get away with it. But you can only do that if it's really clear, hey, this is what we're going to do for the next like 5 sessions.
That's true. Yeah.
Whereas like my campaigns are typically a little bit more sandbox, and so I think it is hard, but I'm like, I think I'm willing to like, die on that hill to be like, the world needs to feel like it feels. The world needs to feel big. To me,
I have never felt like, we're traveling for a week, this is going to suck.
Right.
Because, and I think that's some of where maybe as a DM you feel maybe like a little bit of imposter syndrome, because if you do or don't have something.
Right.
And you're like, they're going to find me out, they're going to know, and then it's going to ruin everything. Most of the time the players don't care, or they don't notice.
All you have to do as a DM is roll a dice. And just be like, oh, okay, interesting. Yeah. And then continue on with like your journey continues.
Everybody freaks out. What? He's rolling dice. Why is he rolling dice?
Yeah. It might not mean anything.
Yeah.
And
it's not even a dice behind there. You're just rolling a piece of plastic around.
I think that watches and like travel time is some of the best time where I can like point the players at each other and make them, essentially participate in telling the story. Mm-hmm. The players participate in telling the story in 2 ways. One, they make decisions against or toward, directed at me. Yep. Say like, I'm gonna fight the king. I'm gonna smite the devil.
Yeah, they give you story fuel.
Right. The other way that they progress the story essentially is dialoguing with each other. The unfolding of the story of the party in D&D is not just player to DM, DM to player, it's also player to player.
Oh, yeah.
And so some of the best moments, I think, from any campaigns that we've done have been when, like, two players have had a heart-to-heart, right? I think in our home game, when we had the conversation pastries or whatever, all of our characters kind of unbeknownst to, we didn't collaborate on this. They all had these, like, deep secrets.
Yeah, this was like the, first intro arc is over. This is why we're really, this is really what makes us tick. It was great.
It was awesome.
I didn't talk for like 30 minutes as the DM.
It was so fun. And that all happened during like downtime when we were in a city. I mean, essentially like that those conversations could have happened on watch or traveling. But if you as a DM are like, man, I need to fill the space to make it more interesting, try to use that time to engage the characters, either with NPCs or to make the characters, try to find ways to make the characters engage with each other. I don't know exactly how to do that, but I think you can use an NPC to sort of do that.
That's brings me to another thing I was thinking about. If you've got players that maybe are not as quick to role play or as quick to kind of take the reins on their own story, or maybe we'll say it's even stalled a little bit, like for whatever reason, there's not a lot going on with this character at the moment. Where do you come down on as a DM? I don't want to say dictating, but kind of, you make this insight check. You feel X. You understand Y. I feel like sometimes that can be a difficult line. Your player can just be like, no, I don't like that. Can we not do that? It's very easy to say no. But, the idea of, you feel a sense of fear that you've never felt. And the player might not like that, or they might be, I don't think that at all. And here's why. And I think sometimes I don't ever want it to feel too much like a video game. Like you're just being, the player is being given inputs they just have to respond to.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, I'm trying to establish a vibe or establish a sensation that I want this villain to have for you. But you can also, twist it, tweak it, amend it for how you want. That was a very lengthy question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm trying to think through how I've handled that in the past.
And I can say I've never, as a player with you, I've never felt, pigeonholed or railroaded. Like, well, I didn't want to think that, but Nathanael said I had to. And so whatever you've done has worked.
Yeah, I think. I mean, maybe this is overly simplistic, but I would come at this from two directions. The first is, I think something that you're describing is the importance of having a really good, explicit, as in like you spell things out, session 0, where you talk about, here's my expectations, here's how this is going to work, who is your character, do the work to like give the DM background to the character so the DM understands who they are, all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So having a really good session 0 where you establish expectations, talk about all these things prior to being in a situation like this. And then on my end, especially with insight, I always try to be like, if a player rolls well on an insight check, they are intuiting information. They are not necessarily being provoked to feel a certain way. Like, I don't think that I've ever, there have been times that I've said, you do this, you do X, you feel X, but that is always the result, almost always. I'm not going to say always, because there might be an exception. Almost always the result of, like, someone has cast a spell on you. Right. You've become ensorcelled.
Yeah, something that's going on that's mechanically, there's a reason in the rule book for why you're doing this.
Right. Yeah. Or, like, the thing that comes to my mind is when y'all were fighting the hag in campaign 1.
Me too.
And y'all were trapped in that, like, labyrinth. And then as you guys saved out of it was an illusory labyrinth, and as you guys saved out of it, I narrated to the other party members, you see this character sprint off and run away and vanish.
You did, because one of my characters saved out of it or something, and you said Jonas runs away. I just looked at you like, no, I don't. And then you're like, no, come with me, I'll explain.
Yeah, right, yeah. So,
it was like, oh.
Agency's never taken away.
Right.
How I run it, agency's never taken away unless there's a mechanical reason that agency's been taken away. Like, I mean, if someone were to become dominated by, an evil wizard, or turned into a vampire, a vampire spawn who's under the thrall of another vampire, right? Like, these are reasons that I would be like, you are not your own anymore. But in terms of basic stuff, I think I would be able to achieve the feeling of like, you're afraid by just making the bad guy seem really scary in
yeah.
how I described him. Like, if that does that make sense? Like,
very much so.
like having it be like, and some of it is like y'all are just good enough players that like, oh, this guy's really big and bad. Like my character would be scared of him in some way. Yeah, it's not my job to dictate how the player characters feel or react.
I think to your point of having a good insight and understanding of what the player and the character have kind of established already,
right,
is a huge help, because in that way, ideally, you're going to say that even if you say them like you feel a fear or there's a sensation that you've not experienced before, it's in keeping with the character, and hopefully the player's not going to be like, what are you talking about? I would never,
right.
Sparkles the Barb would never feel that way.
He has no fear.
He has no fear, exactly.
Mr. Sparkles has no fear whatsoever. I think another piece to this is like just knowing the player. Like, for example, in our first campaign, you were pretty upfront to me when we were talking about your character's backstory. You were like, I don't want a super complicated backstory. I don't need that.
Yep.
I don't need little hooks throughout the thing. Like, I'm just down to go along for the adventure and along for the ride. Whereas Michael, the other guy on our podcast with us, he wanted like this overarching backstory with like side quests and hooks that I'd laid in the path throughout. And so, like
Jonas was just along for the ride.
Yeah, like it played into how both of you enjoyed the game differently. So I wasn't gonna like make both of you. I wasn't gonna try to put both of y'all in the same box.
In the same box, yeah. You're such a good DM.
Thank you. It's fun. I love it.
All right, we've been moving right along. Now I thought maybe some podcast specific questions.
Ooh.
And so I'm gonna be more of the moderator / questioner.
All right.
I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit more.
Yeah, hit me.
What has been different for you DMing specifically for a podcast? Has there been any big differences or any like pressures or distinctions that you felt inclined to make? Or because I feel like you're running the game exactly like you do in our home games. I think we all try to be a little more polished, maybe a little more mindful of time. And some of that is because we know what we're recording, and we also know that, I've been in here for 4 hours. We need to go home and do chores, or,
right.
Kids are tired of being quiet. So is there anything like that has changed, or that you feel like you DM differently? And if you'd rather not answer that, you don't have to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really don't think that I've changed. There has not been a conscious effort to change.
Yeah, I would. I have not noticed one either.
Maybe, I mean, maybe the most is like trying to make sure that our language is PG. Every once in a while you'll be like,
fiddlesticks,
let something through that shouldn't. That if it was just, I might be a little more free with like, if it's a bad guy or a sailor who I want to have a particularly salty tongue, be a little more free with that in like a home game. But yeah, I feel like in terms of how I world built this world, how I designed the campaign is very, very similar to our home campaign that I DM'd.
Okay. All right. Here's a question for you. What do you, I've got all this statistics here. At least this is the Spotify stuff. So that's,
okay.
That is where most of our stuff seems to come from data wise. So I'll just, hey, why not? What do you think is our most listened to episode?
Probably the first one.
First one. Do you have any idea at a play count? Again, according to Spotify.
Oh man, I have no idea. I would imagine it's in the hundreds, like
400
or 500.
Oh, if only 500. No, 84.
Wait, but how many listens do we have? Like,
well, see, and again, this is where some of the analytic stuff is. I don't quite understand, but I at least look at the numbers and I enjoy when they go up, and they only go up. So per Spotify, we have I think 677 total all platform plays. This is the number of times any of your episodes were streamed for at least 60 seconds or downloaded across all platforms.
Okay.
So that's 677.
I think that's the number that I had in my mind, that I was like, well, surely people start with episode 1,
Yes, episode 1 is by far the biggest at 84 listens. Or 87, let me I navigated away from that.
I guess if 80, like if the plays count individual discrete times that people press play on an episode, it makes sense that it would be like 80 for the first and probably like 30, 40 for most of the rest of them.
Close. What do you think is the second most listened to episode?
The second one?
Very good.
Okay.
Episodes 2 and 3 have been tied for a very long time. They are both sitting at 53.
Okay.
And then it's weird. We have 2 ties in the top 5. And then episodes 4 and 5 each have 47 listens. Weirdly, though, okay, so here's more weirdness. And this is, I don't know how they track all this mess. Episode 6 is way down below episode 7 and 8.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like
people are just like, this one's not as interesting.
Not as good.
I'll skip ahead.
Yeah, episode 6 has the same number of listens as the little trailer that we did.
Oh, interesting.
Weirdly so. The Spotify audience is interesting.
Man, all that, I feel like all that is like where they're from, or like, I feel like so that, how could they possibly do that?
According to our platforms, 70% of our usage is Spotify, 20% is Apple, and 8% is other, i.e. the web browser. We have a 12% age demographic in the 60-plus range. 12% of our listeners per Spotify are 60-plus, which I just think is very cool.
That's so interesting. I wonder if it's our parents have listened to an episode.
Could be. Whoever you are, if you're enjoying our D&D and you've played it since its inception, keep on trucking. We're glad you're here with us.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? It's hard to figure out.
Spotify's weird. Data's weird.
Well, I feel like there's a section on the analytics that are like, what country are your listeners from? And I'm just like, I feel like when you use a VPN, it like scrambles like your location. I'm like, any country that's not the United States, I feel like is probably like the result of someone masking their IP address or something like that. I don't know how it all works.
Yeah, again, per Spotify, 93% is in the US, 4% is in the UK. That's newer.
We see you, United Kingdom.
Yeah.
We see you, Great Britain.
Don't make fun of my bad English / Kingdom of the Wood accent.
You can make fun of my accents. It's okay. I do a lot, so I don't try to do all of them good.
US, then UK, we've got some Canada, and then less than 1% Russia, the Philippines, South Africa, and South Korea.
Interesting. All right.
Just some data. What do you think our longest episode is?
Oh, man. I'm trying to, I feel like it was one of the ones when we were in the sewer. I feel like there were some sewer moments that just stretched on for a while. But I could be wrong.
Just stretched on, he says. Actually, our longest episode was the one that we just released.
Oh, how about that?
At 1 hour and 50 minutes. We had been weirdly consistent in the 120 to 135 range up until then. That was the big outlier.
All right.
Yeah, so that was the sewer. It stretched on.
I don't know.
At least we're not listening at every door like we did in our home games for a while.
Yes, it was like just a automatic like process to get to the door. Yep. All right, I listen to the door. All right, perception check. All right, you roll good or you roll bad. Here's what you hear or don't hear.
Yeah.
All right, does someone else want to listen to the door to make sure that we heard everything? Rinse and repeat.
Yep, I think we're good. Thanks.
I feel like Michael in particular was like, I cannot be surprised. Like we should not be surprised. I can't let it happen. Which was I feel like that was a choice for his character.
Yeah. And I think, too, my character was okay to ignore doors, but if we were going in a door, we're not going in here not prepared. That was some of it, too, yeah. Well, thanks again for listening, everybody. We hope you have enjoyed this further discussion. And to be perfectly honest, we hope we'll get back to playing soon, but as of right now, Nathanael and his wife have epic levels of exhaustion, and Michael is still living out of boxes with a move. So we're trying our best. Just thanks for your patience before and after the fact. And that'll wrap us up for this session. And like always, if you enjoyed it, give us a comment or a subscribe or a follow, and we'll hope to bring more content, either more like this or more like the sessions in the near future. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye.